Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Digital Hustle Career Pathway 101. We are so glad to have you with us for another conversation focused on how careers are evolving in today's digital economy. I'm Shamima Raihan Manzoor, and as always, I'm joined by my amazing co host Shahida.
Hi, everyone. Today's episode is all about working in B2B tech. If you're just tapping into this field or thinking about where your career is headed next, this episode is for you.
Let's start with a signal you really shouldn't ignore. According to International Data Corporation IDC's 2026 sponsor survey, 58% of senior B2B tech marketers expect their event budgets to increase next year, even as budgets everywhere else are under pressure.
That alone tells us something huge is happening because companies don't increase spend unless they're confident it's driving real results.
Exactly. And the reason is simple. ROI is no longer optional. B2B organizations are doubling down on what directly drives pipeline, influence, and growth.
Roles are evolving fast. We are seeing a clear move away from narrow generalists towards specialists. People who understand go to market systems, buyer journeys, revenue influence, and cross functional execution, not just isolated skills.
IDC's data shows that success today is measured by cost per opportunity, lead quality, and deal influence in key accounts, not vanity metrics.
And when companies change how they measure success, they change who gets hired, who gets promoted, and who gets trusted inside the organization.
That's why today's conversation is so important. We are talking about the future of B2B tech careers, what's changed, what skills actually matter now, and how professionals can future proof themselves in a market that rewards impact over titles.
And to help us unpack all of this today, we are joined by someone who's lived these changes firsthand.
Our guest today is Dr. Jim, a founder and fractional head of growth who works closely with early stage founder led B2B startups to help them go from zero to real traction.
He brings deep expertise across go to market strategy, content led growth, and founder led sales, and has helped B2B HR tech, TA tech, edtech, and executive coaching companies integrated sales, marketing, and partnership into a unified GTM motion.
Over the past decade, Dr. Jim has helped teams build multi-million dollar pipelines from zero, win their first customers in competitive markets, and create repeatable growth systems without wasting time or resources.
He's also a seasoned podcast host and content strategist known for using content not just for visibility, but to build credibility, partnerships, and revenue.
We're thrilled to have you here, Dr. Jim.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I already have some thoughts on some of the stuff that you mentioned from your data sources, particularly the component where you mentioned that the B2B needs of the future is going to require more specialists and generalists. At least in the space that I work in, I don't think that's going to actually be accurate. For what it's worth, my 2 cents is that the world of tomorrow, or the B2B world of tomorrow, is going to require people to be much more generalists and have broader scope in what they do than be specialists. And here's what I mean. When you think about how B2B exists today and has existed for the last 15 years, it's always been throw more volume at whatever problem that you're trying to solve. And what's happened from a customer perspective is that more calls, more emails, more messages, more DMs, customers are running away from that in droves. And what that means is that every seller, marketer, partnerships person has got to go to market differently and show up much more authentically and get away from the volume game. That requires each person at the desk level to have a broader set of skills. Your sellers who are used to just operating in the revenue cycle need to be effective marketers, need to be able to cultivate partnerships. So they're going to need a broader set of skills to be successful in the world of the future, at least from my perspective. And that also means that if you're on the sales side, you can't just rely on an SDR team to fill the top of your funnel. You have to prospect on your own. You have to build relationships much earlier in the buying cycle, maybe before even the customer is product aware or problem aware. So that requires a broader set of skills than what has been the case for the last 20 years. So I'll get off my soapbox, but I wanted to immediately react to that.
Thank you so much for putting in your 2 cents, Dr. Jim. It is really important that we understand the changes from, of course, someone who's professional and, again, who has experienced that firsthand.
Love to know more about why you felt that significance of being the generalist, where research is showing a specialist. And that's where we want to bring out from our conversation that what changes need to be identified to make this B2B career successful. So, Dr. Jim, let's start with the big picture. When you look at the digital economy today, it feels very different from even 5 or 10 years ago. From your perspective, how is that shift reshaping career opportunities in B2B tech?
So I'm going to couch what I say with this caveat. And the caveat is that my perspective, the space that I typically play in, is early stage and accelerating growth startups. So for those founders who are at 0, trying to get to 1, trying to establish traction, generally speaking, you can call that group before product market fit is where I play. And these are typically founder-led organizations. And a lot of times the organizations that I work with, the founders that are running those organizations don't come from a sales background. They might be more from the product or technical side and are selling because it's necessary, but it's not something that they naturally it's not something that they've grown up in their careers doing. So when we look at the big picture, which is, things have changed from what it was before to what it is now, and what does that mean for all of us? What that means, at least from my perspective, is buyers, in terms of buyer behavior, are doing much more research and much more discovery on their own and evaluation on their own. And you as a seller or a marketer will never see any of that. So what that means for sellers and marketers is that you have to be much more long game focused. And that's going to be problematic because every company that you work for only thinks on a quarterly basis. So when you look at a buying cycle, the buying journey for a typical buyer can be 2 years before they're problem aware, product aware, solution aware, all of that sort of stuff. It can take years to do that. So it's incumbent on sellers and marketers to focus on relationships and building those relationships for the long run. And one of the books that I often cite when I have these conversations is Building a Customer for Life. You have to have that customer for life mindset. You have to play the long game, because it requires you to add value through that buyer journey. And then when they're ready, you need to be in that buyer's awareness for them to actually select you as a part of their shortlist. There was a recent study by Dentsu that indicated that, and it was one of the largest market research studies that was done. And what they showed in their study was that when they interviewed, I think the number was like 10,000 buyers. When they interviewed those buyers, the people that actually ended up on their shortlist were people that were already in their networks and engaging with them well before they were even problem aware. So for sellers and marketers, it means you have to engage with everybody in your TAM authentically and not immediately rush to get them into a demo or a product or start pitching them about a service that you have. So it's a different mindset, and it's going to be a tough mindset to kind of crack, especially when you have short-term thinking that's ruling the way most companies behave.
What do you feel, Dr. Jim, that when it comes to B2B, is much more complex, obviously, from B2C, and then building that connection and relationship is definitely challenging. So, how do you define the challenge that the seller should keep in mind over the years?
So I can't really speak to B2C because I haven't sold into that space for probably, I don't know, 20 years. But in B2B, when you look at how decisions are made within an average organization, the stakeholder committee that makes a decision is anywhere from like 7 to 12 people. So when you're looking at navigating that number of stakeholders, especially in an enterprise deal, it's going to take a long time to cultivate those relationships. And it's going to actually take a long time for you to cultivate those relationships in an authentic way. Now, that's at the enterprise level, but I think those principles still hold in SMB and mid-market spaces as well. In any given deal, you're probably going to have 4 to 6 stakeholders that are involved in the decision process behind the scenes that you don't have visibility into. So what that means in terms of how you tackle that as a seller or as a marketer, it means that you need to be much more collaborative and much more consultative in how you engage with that. And you need to approach those relationships from the perspective of what are the holes in my thinking versus what are the holes in your process or your thinking. So it's always inward focused. And the way that that shows up is that throughout that entire buying journey that that customer is going through, you should be pressure testing all of your value propositions and validating all the things that you're bringing to the table and connecting it to the day-to-day of that person's environment and that stakeholder committee's environment. So you can't go into these things expecting that you're going to just one-to-one sell. That's a B2C motion. And I think that's a pitfall that happens with a lot of people, is that they assume B2B can be run in most cases the same way that B2C can be run. And that's not the case unless you're talking about a low dollar amount product or service. Typically in the organizations that I've worked with, it's usually been the SMB or mid-market space, and you're talking about contract values of anywhere from like 20K to 60K. No one person is going to have budget authority to sign off on that. Even if you're dealing with the CEO is going to bring in other stakeholders, and you have to be able to navigate that roundtable session and make sure everybody is heard. And you need to operate with the understanding and the posture that your solution is likely not the fit for them. And that mindset shift is going to be difficult for a lot of people. So you as a seller at any level should be going into those roundtables or those stakeholder engagements, assuming the posture that you're not convinced that you're the right product to solve the problems that they have. And that shift is going to actually create much more conversation for everybody that's involved.
So you mean to say building credibility is another thing that there should be between both the parties to make it successful?
Yeah, and that's a great way for you to summarize what I said. Building credibility is essential, and the way that you build credibility is being not an evangelist for your product, but an evangelist for the customer that's sitting in front of you. You want to demonstrate that your top interest is helping them solve the most pressing problem that they have. And that means that your solution might not solve the most important problem. So that's why you have to be on the side of the buyer instead of the side of the product. Because if you're truly operating with a buyer-centric approach, it's all about what's the most pressing problem that the buyer is dealing with that you can help them solve, even if it means that your product isn't the solution that they land on. So I typically in those conversations take the position that, hey, I'm not sure if we're the right product for you. I'm not sure if what we solve is the most important thing on your radar. So let's have a conversation and figure that out so that by the end of this, we can either decide we're going to move forward together or the timing isn't right. Both of those are wins, because what you don't want as a seller is a pipeline full of people that are soft and you don't know if it's a viable opportunity or not, because then you're spending time across all of these things that haven't been properly vetted, which is the opportunity cost of that is that you're missing out on better opportunities that are closer to the type of customer that you want to bring on. That discipline of being ruthless in qualifying and being a ruthless advocate for what the customer is looking for and solving their customer problem is something that a lot of sellers don't have or choose not to take. It's all about let me push them into the next stage in the funnel.
I will build a little bit on the term that we hear a lot, which is GTM, or go-to-marketing knowledge. So why has this become such a critical skill, Dr. Jim?
It's going to be difficult for me to answer in broad terms. I can answer it from just what I do. GTM can encompass all sorts of things depending on the stage that you're at as a startup. So again, I operate in the space where founders are just trying to get traction. They're trying to figure out product market fit. So GTM for them is as simple as, how do I have more meaningful conversations with people that are potentially my ICP? And you don't have a playbook. Like, those founders don't have a playbook, or they might have a loose framework of a playbook. Nothing's done consistently. There isn't like a sales operating manual that's in place. There's no discipline across funnel stages and qualification and all that sort of stuff. So what I do at that founder level, at that stage of the organization, is put in a system and a process that allows them to scale up the volume of meaningful conversations that they're having, that they can have with their target ICP, so that they can run rapid experiments and actually find out, is my messaging on target? Is my product theory on target? And you're pressure testing it all the way. So you're actually building all of those marketing components on the fly. You're building your assets on the fly, but in the process, you're also actually moving people through the funnel. So when you think about go to market in my context, this is like building the framework for an operation to run effectively, because you're standardizing the process. So that's what I do in my terms. Like, when you think about bigger go-to-market operations, that gets into tech stack and all this sort of stuff, which I typically don't really get involved with, because the stage of the organizations that I work with are much younger in their development. Now, think of it this way. The wheelhouse that I operate in is, I'll come in on a fractional basis with a founder who maybe has one or two, or maybe not even a single customer. And my life cycle within those organizations is to go from 0 to roughly 300 customers at the top end. Once you have 300 customers, you have a structured, repeatable process that now you need to build some operational rigor into it as you work to scale from that. So that's the space that I operate in. It's going to be different for businesses based on where they are in their in their development cycle. But I want to go back to something that you said when you're talking about B2B and B2C and being customer centric. In a lot of ways, yes, the motion from B2C versus B2B is different. But ultimately, it's in both of those, you should be customer centric. You should be customer obsessed. And that's the part that gets missed. And the way that it gets missed is that, we never actually ask the customer why they actually buy from us. And that's what I help do for the organizations that I come in at, is if you already have customers on the board, the first thing that I'll probably do is a win analysis. Why did you buy? What was the problem that you were trying to solve internally? What was the process that looked like that you had to go through to get approved on that? All of that shapes what you do from a messaging perspective out in the marketplace. What happens is that far too many organizations aren't doing those win analyses, aren't doing those customer interviews. So they're going to market on guesses. And I'm don't guess at the problem. Don't guess at how you should go to market. Don't guess at what's important to your customer. If you can have a theory, validate that theory through conversation. And this is where you build an overall collaborative process in how you sell. You're coming alongside your buyer. Josh Braun, who's a sales coach on LinkedIn, he often talks about, removing friction from the buying and selling process. Well, the way you remove that friction is stop being the seller in the process, because just by being the seller, you're creating an adversarial relationship. You're creating resistance. So instead of being a seller, be a consultant and come alongside of your buyers and really understand the problem that they're trying to solve, and have them look at the problems that they're facing right now and pressure test those problems against your proposed solution or product theory. And that's going to get you further along the way to traction and refine your messaging. So we need to like, the mechanics of B2B versus B2C is different. but it's still people to people, and you're never going to make progress in moving a deal along if you're not seen as credible, if you're not trusted, if you're not behaving in a way that demonstrates to that person sitting across from you that you're operating in their best interest and you're committed to solving the most pressing problem that they have. So the complexity obviously comes in, and it's going to vary from business to business, but the bigger the deal size, the more complex your GTM motion becomes.
That's very interesting. I would like to ask a little bit more about how you mentioned that when you're starting off and the buyer or the customer does not have, they're starting from zero, as you mentioned. So you don't have enough information about them. How do you actually build on that? Do you start with theory and then, as you said, you pressure test and see what works and what doesn't work? How does that go?
Yeah. So when you're at that stage, when you don't know why people buy from you, how people buy from you, what resonated from them, you build a theory around why those things are. Then you pressure test that theory through customer interviews. If you have customers on board, if you're legitimately starting from zero, and a great example I'll talk about is what happened when I was fractional as the head of growth for Engagerocket. Engagerocket was a people analytics and employee engagement platform that had a really strong foothold in Asia Pacific. They were a Singapore-based company, and they wanted to expand into the U.S. And their founder spent 6-8 months in the U.S. trying all sorts of different ways to get traction. They built a product-led growth component to get early adopters in. They did conferences. They spent at least a few $100,000 trying to get traction in the U.S. before I came along. So what I did was, well, the first thing that you need to solve for when you're trying to get traction is just have more meaningful conversations with people who might be your potential buyers. So they were an HR tech company in Singapore, and our product theory was, well, the same buyers in the same segments should be buying here. We didn't have any referrals, or we didn't have any existing customers or anything like that. We're starting from zero here, where there's no name recognition or anything. So I had been doing this for quite a while before Engagerocket and I partnered up. So what we did is we tied a content layer, so podcasting, into our go-to-market motion, and we integrated the buying journey and the selling process into that. So everything was treated as a research exercise versus a selling exercise. So we would have, prep sessions, we would have episodes, and all of it is built around various product theories that we have. And the actual show was about problems that HR leaders face. So what we did when we segmented our market is we did a 90-10 approach. 90% of our guests are going to be in what we think our dominant market is going to be, which are senior and executive level HR leaders. 10% of our guests are going to be experiments. They could be CIOs that we get on, CEOs, COOs, could be marketing people, whatever. And we would add in other segments as well. Going through that process, every engagement that you have, every conversation that you have is a learning opportunity for you to pressure test your theory, and you gauge how far a deal goes along. And what we realized was that in the US market, HR tech is saturated. There's a lot of companies that do that. So making headway in the HR tech space as an employee engagement and people analytics platform is going to be an uphill struggle. We landed our first customer in edtech, and we did a win analysis in K through 12 edtech, and that refined our entire theory, and we went deep into the K through 12 space. So that's how we went from 0 to 25 or 30 customers in edtech, completely shifting our ICP when our product theory wasn't validated out. So we were evaluating wins, and what we did is the first win we got, we deep dive into that segment. And what you do is, as you crack a segment, as you get a win in a segment, you go deep into that segment. So you end up specializing in a handful of things instead of specializing in everything.
I was actually really getting into the point that Dr. Jim is talking about, that the significance of being generalist rather than being specialist, which actually proves that still there might be certain articles, research going on which need to be revisited from our today's conversation. So it's really a great takeaway.
I want to jump in on that real quick, and it might sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but you kind of need both. But I look at it from an evolutionary perspective. So when we look at the history of the world, like whenever there's been a big extinction event, what are the things that survived? It's the ones that were generalists. When you look at what's happening today, the species that are adapted to a specific climate, when that climate gets disrupted, those go extinct. You need specialists in a well-functioning ecosystem, but those specialists are most vulnerable to disruptions. So my point of view from an evolutionary perspective, from a business perspective, is that your survivability as an individual, as a business, is better served having more generalist skills. And especially in my spaces where I'm talking with really lean founder-led organizations, everybody wears all sorts of different hats. Like I've spent my career being on the sales side, but I think I'm pretty effective in a lot of different marketing spaces and partnership spaces. So that makes me versatile in a lot of different environments. And that's where I say there's more value in being a generalist from my perspective, but that doesn't mean that you eliminate specialists either. If you're a specialist, you better be really unique, because if there's a disruption, you're the most vulnerable to be eliminated.
You speak my mind, Dr. Jim, because when I was researching about it and I have gone through this article, this question of specialization, specialist in a B2B tech, it triggered my mind. Is it really to be, being specialist and survive in this dynamic world, or it's like both, you are saying? That being a generalist and also being a specialist is a combination, that how people balance both, and then they can find out the survival mechanism for this B2B tech industry. So let's zoom in on startups for a moment. On small, fast-moving teams where resources are limited, what skills actually make someone indispensable?
I'm going to speak only to the revenue side of an organization, because that's where I've typically operated. So when you're talking about what skills make you invaluable in the revenue side of an organization, obviously your ability to self-source funnel and build relationships through multiple channels, that makes you invaluable. Here's what I mean. So if you look at a traditional sales organization at a more mature organization, you have SDRs, you have technical sales engineers, and you have account executives. SDRs set the appointment. Account executives will warm and qualify that prospect up. Sales engineers come in and do the demo alongside the account executive, and all three of those work together with the buying committee to move a deal along. So when you look at that dynamic, that works in large organizations, larger revenue organizations. It's not as effective in a mid-size or smaller organization. So a broader set of skills where an account executive has the ability, somebody that's purely in the sales seat, but has strong writing skills, strong content skills, strong partnership orientations where they can go in a conference and have their own engine to self-source funnel, that person becomes much more valuable to an organization than somebody that has to rely on a sales engineer and an SDR to drive pipeline. So when you're thinking about how do you make yourself invaluable to an organization, from a revenue perspective, those sellers who have a broad-based set of skills across the revenue umbrella, they're going to be your most valuable players, because they can, if you had to fire all of your SDRs and fire all of your sales engineers, they would still be able to generate pipeline because of the particular set of skills that they bring to the table.
So it brings me for the next question, Dr. Jim, that when it comes to working for a small company compared to working for a bigger company, do you think it varies? This making oneself indispensable will definitely become different.
Yeah. I can't speak absolutely definitively to larger organizations because I've only worked at mid-size or startup organizations. And the reason why I stay away from larger organizations is because the roles are too narrow. For me, if it's just like one narrow set of things that I'm doing over and over again, I get bored. So with that being said, in larger organizations, your architect level people, so if you're talking about IT, you have IT architects who are technically sound and have big picture strategic thinking in terms of how they can map out things. Architects are highly valuable. In larger organizations on the revenue side, those deep specialists, those SMEs within a given set of skills, like whoever can integrate sales, marketing, partnerships on the revenue side and bring it all together in terms of a technology perspective and also what those motions look like when they're integrated and working well together, that has high value. So in larger organizations, specialists and SMEs, those architecture types are going to be highly valuable. I just couldn't work in those organizations just because the roles are too defined too narrow. I prefer more green spaces to go run around and do stuff.
That's a fun take, Dr. Jim. So we are talking about startups just now, and let's dive a little bit deeper into the content-led growth, right? I'm sure you have done a lot of work around that. So from your experience, what does that really look like in practice for B2B startups?
So from a B2B startup perspective, I call content the great equalizer for any startup organization. And here's why. When you look at larger organizations, they already have product market fit. They already know what their ICP is. They already have their playbook built. And they have a repeatable set of things that they can just throw bodies at, and you just repeat that on an ongoing basis, and you'll run into wins. They've already defined all the things that they need to define, so they're already on that scaling journey. As a startup, you don't have any of that, and nobody knows you. Like, nobody knows who you are, nobody knows your product, nobody cares about what you do, none of that. So how do you actually get equal footing with the big players in your marketplace? And that's where content allows founder-led organizations and startup organizations to level the playing field. Because what it allows you to do, and it doesn't matter which medium you pick. I happen to be video first, but you can do audio first, you can do newsletters or blogs or whatever. But the idea is to build in public so that you can build trust at scale. And that requires radical transparency in how you show up. And one of the things that I always talk to startup founders about is think about the buying process when you're dealing with a big company. What does that buying process look like? You go to their website, you fill out a form, then you have to talk to somebody else who qualifies you to determine who the right person is. And then when you go to the right person, you ask them, how much does this thing cost? They don't really answer your question. You have to go to like 7 different meetings before you actually find out how things cost or even how things work. It's a big pain. What I usually suggest to startup founders is use content in all stages of your funnel, not only to build relationships, but also advance the deal to the point where I say, hey, every customer problem that you validate, you should have a micro demo, a 2-minute explainer within your product on your website that helps people actually see this is what we solve. These are the 3 things that we solve the best. This is how you actually solve it within our environment. Reach out if you want more information or I want to have a deeper conversation. And when larger organizations hear that, they deal with like product view that's public facing as if it's like a state secret, like they're the CIA. It's not that serious. It's not that deep. You need to be radically transparent about all of those things and what content allows you to do, both from a build perspective, but it also allows you to validate your product theories and all of your messaging out in public. And it gives people an opportunity to live or experience your solution without ever having to talk to you. That way, by the time somebody reaches out to you, you already have a strong feeling that, hey, there is intent here because they've engaged with all of these different things. And they're coming to us because they want to have a more meaningful conversation. So what content allows you to do is get your message out at scale, build trust at scale, and build a relationship that starts much earlier so that by the time people actually are raising their hands, there's a higher level of trust or intent that's been built out that helps you actually move the deal faster.
That is a very interesting take, Dr. Jim. Would you call this, in layman terms, usually we say seeing is believing. So would you say that's one of the reasons that you prefer videos over audios or newsletters?
So the reason why I prefer video is, one, it's personal preference, but the other part is that you have so many assets that you get from a video, from just one video that you record, that isn't replicated by other tools. Like if you do an interview and write a blog or a newsletter off of that interview, it's still valuable. People consume information in different ways. They'll use all of those different things. If I'm not a reader, I'm not going to read your newsletter. But I watch videos all the time and I listen to podcasts all the time. So those are my preferred ways of consuming information. When you actually lead with video first, you get the video asset, you get the audio asset, the transcript can be turned into a blog. The transcript can be actually bolted on as part of a newsletter. You can break up key segments or quotes that you get from that interview in that video and use it for tweets or like short form content. You can, if you have a Canva license, you can take a quote from somebody that you interviewed, stick it on a Canva template with their image, and you're actually broadcasting what they do. So the versatility that you get out of video, you're building a content flywheel. And that's the other thing that I talk about when I talk to founders, is that you can't hire a full-time marketer. You can't hire a full-time partnerships person. You can't hire a full-time like CRO. What you need is somebody that actually brings all of those skills to the table and creates a content flywheel for you to use across all of your different channels, so that you're building an attraction model from your TAM for people that might be interested in learning more about you. And that's what video allows you to do, is that it allows you to create that content flywheel where you do something once, but you get 10 assets out of doing that one time. That's a great like bang for your buck.
Absolutely agreed.
Yeah, before I move into the next question, this conversation just now you and Dr. Jim were having, that triggers my mind about the age of AI, the content strategies. Do you think it's an advantage for the marketers to capitalize different video content, making it more significant to the audience?
That's an interesting question. And what I'm going to say isn't really informed by anything other than just my understanding of customers and what they want. Number one thing, like when I look at how I show up, as well as how others who are doing similar things to me show up online across all sorts of platforms, they show up authentically. So when you're thinking about your content strategy, it's fine to have like an AI component to help supplement some of the stuff that you're doing. But buyers, like, I think everybody has a sixth sense about what's real and what isn't. And what buyers crave is authenticity. So if you, as somebody in the revenue side of an organization, your three responsibilities, your three duties from a customer perspective is to build rapport, trust, and credibility. You can't do that just purely relying on an AI content strategy to do it. People want authenticity. And if you want people to trust you, to build rapport with you, and you want to establish your credibility, you can't fake your way to it. A simple talking head video is going to go a lot further than some polished piece of marketing AI slop that you throw out there. So you have to be careful in how you split that up. I don't see a problem with like adding some of that stuff into your, content strategy. But if you're relying on AI and saying, hey, I can turn out 15 pieces of AI content that's relevant to my product theory, it's not going to move the needle for you, because it's going to be 15 pieces of AI slop where your potential buyer has no idea who you are, what you believe in, what you stand for, those sort of things. In an age where you're seeing more and more AI content come out, people want real. People want to know that the person that I'm dealing with is an actual human, and they want to know what they stand for. So one of the things that I often talk about to founders is that you have to have a point of view. And the perfect example of this, and I'm not an Apple person, I don't own a single Apple product, But when Steve Jobs was running Apple, one of the things that he said was, we don't want to be all things to all people, because people were complaining about how all of the Apple devices were not as functional as the equivalent PC of the time. And Steve Jobs's response was, we're not going to be all things to all people. We want to be the specific set of things to a specific group of people that builds us raving fans. So my advice to founders is you don't need to sell to everybody. You need to sell to a small group of people who are going to be your absolute raving fans and super serve them. That's how you actually get traction. When you try to be all things to all people, you get missed signals and you confuse wins for traction. So don't do that. So that's how it all comes together.
Totally agreed. Now let's take that a step further. How can professionals use content not just for visibility, but to actually create pipeline and measurable business impact?
So the mistake that a lot of people make when they start creating content with the intent of creating pipeline is that they make the content all about them, like inward focus, self-focused. When you're a startup and you're thinking about adding content into your outbound motion, you need to really understand who your target ICP is, or at least what your theory is, who your key persona is that you want to engage with, and what are the problems that they're dealing with. To the point where I always recommend that people actually build out an avatar that they write out. Like one of the first exercises that I take them through is, describe your ideal customer down to what is their average day look like. And it's a creative writing exercise, but it actually helps them narrow focus into what they want to talk about. And once you actually have that document built, all of your content should be built and taken from that document and from what your understanding of what that customer deals with on a day-to-day basis. Then the content that you build speaks directly to the problems that you think they're facing or that they're facing. And that's how you actually build something that actually leads into pipeline. And the reason why I always say you need to be customer obsessed and customer focused in your content strategy, because the opposite of that is talking about yourself. And no matter how great you are, nobody cares about you. Nobody cares about what you have to say. Nobody knows who you are. Nobody cares. They only care about the problem that they're facing right now and if you can help them solve it. So the more oriented that you are to your customer and the problems that they face, the more legs you will have in terms of your content and how that content leads to pipeline. Now, you have to build a process that extends that content. So it just can't be a standalone piece of content. You have to build like down funnel stages that mirror what the buyer journey looks like. So if you're thinking, hey, I can just create a podcast and interview people and then show them a demo, that's not going to work, because you need to still do those first things first, which is build rapport, trust, and credibility. You need to do that first before you're ever given the opportunity to actually sell a product. And there's more to it than just that, but that's the short version. Don't let one piece of content fool you into thinking that you've built enough rapport, trust, and credibility to actually present the product. You have to take a longer view of that journey and make sure that you're not presenting an offer too quickly.
It brings me to the other question, Dr. Jim. Since you work with startups, building content with them, those who don't have really any sort of information, starting from scratch, they don't have the ICP. So there's a chance mistake happens when they build their first ICP. It might not be the ideal one. There might be several attempts necessary to have that real profile to work for that particular company. So when it comes to any kind of mistakes and it affect the content when building any content based on that error or it doesn't work out, how do you deal with those situations?
So the answer to that is you're going to make mistakes. You're going to mistake wins for traction. What you're looking for is repeatable trends. And what you want to do is when you're designing your content theory or content strategy, you want it specific enough so that it's speaking to a particular audience, but you also want to build flexibility in that where you can pivot into other spaces if you need to. You don't want to be doing complete content revamps every 12 months when you get a new batch of customers. So, an easy way to think about it is if you have a broad topic. So, for example, if you have AI as a core pillar of what you do as a product perspective, you can easily pivot from, HR and AI to IT and AI to sales and AI to marketing and AI. It still sits under the same umbrella, and you're going to need to do that because your product theory is going to change. So mistakes are part of the process. It's the same thing that happened with Engagerocket when we tried to open into the US. We thought executives in HR were going to be our buyers. We rapidly went through our process. We built our sales process and funnel on the fly, along with sort of mapping it to the buyer journey. And we ended up in edtech, which is generally done with school superintendents. But that's what rapid iteration, like when we think about it in terms of like a 2-week or 4-week sprint. So you have to apply some agile methodology principles into your content strategy and always be experimenting and seeing, hey, we have traction within this silo. Can we apply it to another silo? What are we focusing on? So using that 90-10 principle that I talked about earlier is a great way for you to build insulation against those mistakes.
I love how powerful this conversation is. We are going from content that breaks up into multiple resources to creating contents that build credibility. My last question will revolve again a lot around the rising businesses. So, Dr. Jim, you've helped teams build pipelines from zero. In your experience, what lessons from early stage customer acquisition can professionals apply to grow in their own careers?
That's a great question. The way that I would answer that and how it leads to traction is you have to do two things simultaneously. You have to have pig-headed discipline when it comes to execution. So you have to have a PhD in terms of doing the things that you need to do to continue getting traction. So once you actually have one piece of your GTM figured out, do that over and over again, and then you build the next piece. But when I'm talking about building the next piece, you have to be relentlessly committed to experimenting. So you have to have discipline in doing the same things over and over again, but you also have to have discipline in experimenting, because that's how you actually move forward and validate all of the traction that you seem, all of the signals that you're getting, and make sure that you're getting actual traction. So if you apply that to the individual as a professional, you might be a marketer, you might be a seller, you might be in partnerships. Look at your day-to-day. You need to identify the things that are absolutely necessary for you to keep deals moving forward or keep your seat at the table. And then you have to ask yourself, what are the areas within this process that I can experiment and find out, how can I optimize this? Is there a better way? Is there a better segment that I should be looking at? So having discipline to stay on track while embedding experimentation into that track is how you actually continue to prove your worth on an ongoing basis. And that's actually how, I hadn't thought about it until this question, that's actually a native part of how I actually bake in building traction into those startup organizations, because it's once you define one piece, you keep working that piece the same way that led to a win. Then you start working the next piece and you experiment with, okay, how can we do this segment of the journey differently to speed up the results? And that's how you actually build your motion on the fly.
That idea of momentum over perfection really stands out. It's such a practical way to think about career growth.
Dr. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights really highlighted how B2B tech careers are evolving, not just around titles or tools, but around the impact. It's clear that understanding go to market, growth, and how decisions actually get made is no longer optional, it's essential.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, if you are building a career in B2B tech, remember this: skills will get you noticed, but understanding how you work drives growth is what will help you advance. Stay curious, think beyond your role, and don't be afraid to step into cross functional conversations.
If today's episode or today's conversation got you thinking differently about your own career path, make sure to subscribe to Digital Hustle Career Pathway 101.
We are here to help you navigate the skills, roles, and decisions shaping the future of work in the digital economy.
Until next time, keep learning, keep building, and keep hustling.